All right, Simon Brown is here with us from across the pond. Welcome to Gray America. How you doing?
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's warm here. Makes a change.
That's good. It's windy and cold here, so we're looking for we're forward to I think 20-degree weather coming up here on the weekend. So looking forward to that.
Ooh-wee.
Yeah,
That's like beach weather in the UK.
yeah.
Yeah, it's too hot.
So Simon, before we get into your book, like verified NDEs, which I think is a great idea, by the way, that you focus on that specific thing. But let's just talk about you and your podcast and a little bit about your research and stuff. You've got a couple, right? You talk about UFOs and our paranormal afterlife. You want to just briefly summarize that kind of work that you're doing?
Yeah, so in total, I've done over 800 episodes across the two podcasts. And yeah, there's one called Our Paranormal Afterlife, which is looking for evidence of an afterlife. So it's nothing about religion or faith. It's more this, if somebody says they got evidence that consciousness continues after death, then I'm interested. And the other podcast, Alien UFO podcast, I suppose you can guess what that one's about. And yeah, I've been doing that for a few years, and it's going fine. Yeah.
Good. How long are they both the same age, or have you done one before and you started one later? Or?
I started the Paranormal Afterlife one first. And so that's done 350 interview episodes, and then a whole ton of others where it's not an interview. But the UFO one's 175 episodes. So that's about half as much, isn't it?
So how long have you been doing the UFO one for then? Because and why did you start out? Why did you decide to do one on aliens and UFOs?
It's because I'm so fascinated by it. And I was doing so many episodes with Our Paranormal Afterlife, and I'm so interested in the whole side of consciousness with UFOs. So it's more about the abduction phenomenon and what's happening there and the high strangeness. So it's very rare that I talk about disclosure on that podcast. It's more that I'd be interviewing people who have these kind of experiences.
Okay, that's funny because I was going to ask you about disclosure a little bit, and I was also going to ask you about the overlap between the two. So I guess that would kind of be it. Is the high strangeness sort of abduction aspect?
Yeah, it's interesting that people who claim to be abducted by aliens have after effects, like they can't wear watches because they break down all the time, and electronic devices will freak out around them, and they have amazing synchronicities happening in their lives, and they have psychic sort of talents in some way. And then those are exactly the same after effects that happen to people who have a near-death experience. So there's two different things there are so wildly apart, but the same after effects. So it makes me wonder what's going on there.
Yeah, that is fascinating. That was another question I had is, of course, because you've done so much research on the afterlife and NDEs, I wanted to talk to you about the special powers, the stuff that people come back from, but I didn't realize it was so prevalent with abductions too. So what's your, the speculation on what the connection is there?
Well, it's that thing. I think it's something to do with consciousness, but also using that word consciousness might not be the right word for it, but that's the closest we can get to what it might be. It could be, you say it's something to do with the universe, or it's something to do with, I don't know, some kind of creation source. There's people who have near-death experiences who meet what they say is God, but then the word God has got so much religious stuff tied to it. So they might start saying, no, it's not God, it's creator, but not so much as that's an individual. It's more of it's the universe. There's some kind of consciousness field, or they might say it's source because it's the source of everything. But that's really what I'm interested in. And I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
No. It was answering it. You did answer it. It's just the connection between the two and why, like, it's so weird that you would have people coming back with effects, these after effects from both phenomena. And I was thinking, one of the similarities is you kind of you've been to a different realm in a way, a different dimension or a different realm. I guess the other aspect would be maybe a contact thing. Like, I wonder if people that come back with those powers in NDEs have specific contact experiences there and not just like an NDE without meeting like a spirit guide or a loved one there or somebody or that energy that you're talking about that allowed them to go back to their life. But so maybe there's a couple different parallels there, contact and extra dimensional experience.
Yeah, because some people who say they encounter ETs, they seem to be, when it's the abduction, that their consciousness is taken and their body stays behind. But then there are other people who have physical marks on their bodies, or people will notice that they're missing, or they wake up outside their house and they're locked out at 3 o'clock in the morning. So something physical's happening there. But on the other side, I've heard from people who they might have a limp, and this is a physical thing that they've had their whole life. It's not they've currently got an injury, but when they're with the ETs on the ship, they don't have a limp, or that they need glasses, but when they're on the ship with the ETs, they don't need glasses. And it's kind of suggesting physically they're not being taken. But I had a woman on my podcast who had an experience where she woke up standing next to her bed and there were 4 alien greys at the foot of her bed. And, she freaked out and she looked around and her body was still in the bed. And that was such a shock. It's suddenly like she slammed back into her body and she sat up and looked down the bed and these greys weren't there. So it's almost like the greys were in that, what would you like call the astral area, the ethereal sort of dimension where she was when she was out of body. So that was interesting. And also I've heard of alien abductees who say they've complained to ETs about being abducted. And the aliens reply, but you agreed to this before you were born. So there's all sorts of weird stuff going on there. There's a woman in my book who, during her near-death experience, she's in this amazing landscape. And there's all these people on her left-hand side that are wearing clothes from all different eras of mankind's history. And then there were some people that looked like they may be from the future. And she said there were beings there that weren't even human. And she was looking at them all and thinking, why are they here? And then she realized these are all her past lives and future lives. And she said she could sense a spark of her soul in every one of them. And so there's another connection there because she said she saw, beings that weren't human amongst all that. But it doesn't seem to come up very often that people encounter ETs in near-death experiences or any part of afterlife experiences.
That's fascinating. So what is there a trend on people that come back with an after effect in NDEs, I guess? Because abductions, it's assuming that there's some sort of contact, but the people that come back from NDEs with some after effect, is there any trends on what happened to them there?
Yeah, well, they do come back, seems more psychic and sort of a mediumship abilities. There's some people I talk to, they've got that before the NDE, but afterwards it's like it's been supercharged and there's so much more psychic and medium. And there's one guy in my book says he woke up from his near-death experience, and after he was stable, the family came in to see him, and he said his dead grandmother was there, and he was passing messages on from her to the family. So he was like instantly a medium from coming out of that near-death experience.
Darren, do you got any questions at all?
Well, is that like a Christ consciousness sort of thing then, where it's all sort of connected? Because it seems like we're not, the one thing you mentioned seems to allude that we're not actually, the people aren't actually being abducted, or maybe you're not actually leaving the body. That to me right away, it just makes me think that it's all in your head. And I don't mean that in like a derogatory way, but it's the same as we're able to sort of create these profound psychedelic experiences without leaving the space, and the brain's capable of all these amazing things, and it's got a bunch of DMT stashed up in there, it seems like. So where does if someone's meeting up, well, I guess, what's your thought on that first?
I don't think that it is all in the mind with the alien abduction thing, because there is physical marks on the body. Other people see things happening and people wake up outside, and there's been some things which they think are alien implants that have been analyzed a lot of scientific study where they've really gone in depth and found some really weird stuff with these implants. So I don't think it's all in the mind. And also, I think DMT takes you somewhere else. Like people do ayahuasca and they have a DMT trip, they go into some other landscape, it seems, and some of them meet this character they call Lady Ayahuasca. But it's very rare within those trips that people encounter UFOs and aliens. The only person I've heard talk about that is Graham Hancock. And while he was doing ayahuasca, do you know Graham Hancock?
Yeah.
And he said he was in this landscape and this UFO landed and these two greys came out of the UFO and waved at him, kind of beckoning him, saying, come over here. And he said he was too scared and he didn't go anywhere near it. But yeah, so I think DMT would not give you that that experience of being abducted by aliens. And it's also a thing where it's very consistent what people report about what happens to them while they're having that experience. And because our bodies naturally have DMT, but we also have something natural that stops it affecting us to have hallucinations. And it's a content, a part of ayahuasca is a thing that turns off what our body does to stop DMT. So, yeah, so I don't think it's in the mind, and definitely do not think NDEs are in the mind, because it's like in my book, there's 30 cases where things are verified that they couldn't have known about.
So then does that lead to like an interdimensional aspect of it or something like that? Like if it's or like you mentioned DMT you might be leaving the body. So there's sort of these different dimensions that we're able to access, and because that's kind of where remote viewing and all this sort of stuff could fit into. There seems to be some weird thing that you can see things, and then if you're talking to dead relatives, you're sort of transcending time and all of that there.
Yeah, it's like using the word interdimensional or multidimensional, you could say in another reality or another universe, because I think there's something there that's weirder than that. And those words are like placeholders to suggest an idea of something. But it does seem that you could say that ETs are interdimensional, maybe some of them, because, you know, there could be more than one group out there, more than one race, and they all have different agendas and maybe at different levels of technology and have different plans of what they're doing. So that's how I'd look at that.
Yeah, different levels of spiritual evolution. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm at all of the above kind of thing. You know, like a lot of it's just all of the above. Like especially with ETs and all the contact experiences. It's just a multitude of different types of entities and experiences and dimensions. And I mean, even the ancients and the ancient wisdom kind of talks about different levels of astral realms and all that stuff too. So there could be layer upon layer of these different realms that some of them might overlap, and you know, maybe some of them have overlapping with NDEs and abduction experiences, or other mystical experiences. And maybe ayahuasca has those that you're close. Maybe lucid dreaming is close. Like there's so many different ways to reach another realm. And maybe some are connected and some aren't, you know?
Yeah. As people who have comas have some very powerful experiences. Some of them are terrible, and some of them are just seems like multiverse experiences. There's a book I read recently called Coma and the Near-Death Experience, where people were saying that they had a whole other life while they were in their coma. There's like a guy who was in his coma for 7 days, said he lived a life of 22 years on another Earth. And that life is just as real as this one. It wasn't a dream or hallucination. He had a job, he worked 9 to 5, he had an apartment, he'd go out at the weekends. He said he even fought for a year in a war in Southeast Asia in a country that doesn't exist on this Earth.
Holy shit.
And then when he woke up from the coma, he was freaked out. He didn't know if this was real or that was real. And there was a woman who got married and had children during this other life on another universe. And when she woke up from her coma, she had this terrible grief of losing her children. And the doctors and her family were like, oh, don't worry, it's just a hallucination. But for her, it was very real. And I talked to another guy who was having this abduction experiences. And he said one day they took him to this apartment, and he was by himself. It seemed like it. He kept on catching a glimpse of something in the corner of his eye, and he'd look round and there was no one there. And this apartment seemed strangely familiar, but he'd never been there before. And when he looked on the side, there are all these photographs, and he was in these pictures with people he'd never met before. And everybody looked so happy and smiling. And it was like, it was another him living another life, and they brought him into this apartment. So that was an abduction thing. And then there's that other thing with comas, and just don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's so complicated, especially when you get into your concurrent lifetimes and like how they can all, like, I find that part really confusing. The concurrent lifetimes, and like that lady that saw all the different versions of herself. But what was I going to say about the coma? So Vinnie Tolman is in your book too, and he was one of my favorite guests on NDEs, and he really made me think of the 3 days phenomena, because when we had him on, he mentioned he was in the coma for 3 days, and I had done all this research on 3 days being a almost like a meme from ancient times, and they talk about it all the time as far as like resurrection and initiation. And ancient near-death experiences. A lot of them have a 3-day length, and then it also gets into healing and travel, and 3 days is just a theme that is like throughout history. Of course, Jesus and the resurrection, all that, of course, but it's way, way, way beyond that. And I think there's some solar and lunar significance. But Vinny's was a modern 3-day experience. Did you? And he came back with powers too. Like his story was just fascinating. But did he? Did you come across any 3 days? Like, did you come across that as a trend at all?
No, I didn't notice that.
Okay.
I wasn't looking for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to have a think about that.
Yeah. Keep an eye on it and see if it comes up a lot. Because I have a whole list. Like, I went through the NDE database too and pulled out a whole bunch of 3-day experiences. And then the ancient literature is just littered with 3-day references. And my theory is a little bit that it might have to do with the lunar and the solar. Like, it's part of our the celestial mechanics in a way, right? And so I feel like we also have 72 hours or 3 days with modern science showing like fasting, and there's a phenomena that happens in our bodies after 3 days too. So, and maybe that's connected to the mechanics of our local solar system too. Maybe it's all connected. Who knows?
Yeah, I heard a thing that said that our body clock's more set up to being on Mars than being on Earth.
Yeah, we just talked about that the other day on our
Yeah.
our last episode there with about Phobos and stuff. Yeah, the circadian rhythms.
Can you give us some examples of those? I'd like to hear some of those verified stories. I wouldn't mind hearing how they're verified. Do you have any juicy ones? Be willing to share?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites is a Hungarian guy called Tibor Putnoki, who went into hospital in the early 90s in Hungary, and he had really high blood pressure, and the doctor told him they very worried about him. And a short while after the doctor left him, he suddenly found himself just standing in the ward, feeling great. And you think, this is good. These nurses rushing past him and a doctor, and he looked round and they're all working on a patient in the bed. He couldn't see who it was, didn't realize it was him. And he even looked at the bed and thought, well, that must be a VIP patient because they're getting so much attention. But on the side of the ward, there's a room where nurses prepare all these things, and it had a two-way mirror. So they could see in the ward, but you couldn't see in the room from the ward. And he thought about, well, what's going on in there? And then in an instant, he was in there. And there's a nurse with a trolley in front of a cabinet. She's taking all these things out of the cabinet really quickly, putting them on the trolley. One of them falls on the floor and rolls underneath the cabinet, but she ignores that and gets everything she needs. And there's another nurse who's on the phone with her husband. And so he's listening in on this phone call, and he can hear both ends of the phone call. And they were talking about a phone number for the doctor because their children are ill, and she's telling him where to find the phone number, and he can't find it. It's in this phone book, because before mobile phones, we'd write down our phone numbers in phone books. And Tybor thought about this bloke, and then instantly he's with him in this apartment, and he can see the books on the shelves, the furniture, the carpet, how the apartment is. And this guy's on the phone, and Tybor notices his socks with little animal pictures on them. And Tybor's thinking, what kind of a man with socks like this? So he's all sorts of other things happen to him, spiritual things, a life review and meeting a spirit guide and what have you. But after he's resuscitated and he's stabilized, the doctor comes to him and says, so you were dead for 9 minutes. What happened? And he told the doctor about this thing that was underneath the cabinet and told him what the label said on it, what the serial number was on it. And the doctor went and found this thing under the cabinet, just as Tybor described it. There's no way he could have known it was there. And the serial number was correct on this item. So the doctor went to the nurse that was on the phone and talked to her, and she confirmed the phone call, the content of the phone call. And so he said to the nurse, do you know this man? Has he ever been to your apartment? And she was, no, never met him. So they went to the apartment, and the doctor saw that it was exactly as Tybor described. And when the doctor returned to the hospital, he was holding those socks with the little animal pictures on. So these are great verifications. How could he know what was happening in an apartment 7 kilometers from the hospital when he was getting CPR in a hospital bed? And there's a kind of skeptical point of view, might say, if this happens to somebody who was in an operating theatre and they looked down on their body and they saw the resuscitation, and then they came back and they said, I saw you doctors do these things in the resuscitation. There's a skeptical argument to say, well, they probably weren't completely dead. They maybe had some form of consciousness and they hallucinated what was happening by what they were hearing. But with Tybor, he saw things that were nowhere near his body. And there's lots more cases in my book like that, as stuff that's miles away that seems to show that consciousness left his body, went somewhere else.
Well, that's what I love about how you focus on the verified stuff in your book, because it takes away that argument about whether they were really dead or really alive or whatever, because you just cut through all that and show that it doesn't even really matter if they're alive or dead, because they had these verifiable experiences with other people and other witnesses. And I think that's fantastic that you focused on that part and put them all together in one compilation, where it's like, these are all, like, if you went through, I mean, these would, in any kind of court, this would stand up if with eyewitness testimony, multiple witnesses and all that kind of stuff. Do you have any other examples of your favorites at all?
Yeah, there's different types of verifications. There's Ingrid Honkler. Have you heard of her? She was a small child in Colombia when this happened. She was nearly 4 years old. And her parents had gone to work, and they had a maid that was supposed to look after the children. And she went into the garden with her big sister, and they had this water tank out there, and they were throwing catch with a small ball over the water tank. And her sister didn't throw it hard enough, and it fell in the water. So Ingrid reached forward to get the ball and fell in the water tank, and she drowned. And she was saying that when she was underwater, she saw a body floating there. She didn't realize it was her body, but it seemed perfectly normal. And she said there were lights, colors, even flowers floating around. And she thought about the maid, and it's like Tybor. She thought about the maid, and then she was in the room with the maid, and she was up at the ceiling looking down at her. And the maid was just lying back on the bed, eyes closed, listening to a soap opera on the radio. And Ingrid said she saw her and thought, oh, wow, there's the maid. And then she thought of her mother, and then instantly she's with her mother, and her mother's walking down the road on her way to the bus stop, and her mum just stopped and turned around and started running back to the house. It's like she had this intuition that something was wrong with one of her children, and she got that spark of intuition at the moment that Ingrid appeared above her.
Wow.
And so her mum ran back to the house and went straight into the garden to the water tank and pulled her out.
Wow.
And, obviously she was resuscitated. But it's when Ingrid got older, she talked to her mum about it. And her mum was basically, how could you know that? That's exactly what happened. I was walking down the street to the bus stop when I turned around and started running. And the maid got sacked. And Ingrid's done some research, and she tracked down that episode of that soap opera from that day and listened to it. And that's exactly what she heard on the radio when she was floating in the room over the maid. So there's a couple of nice little verifications in there with that one.
It does sound a lot like remote viewing when you explain it like that.
Yeah, but the thing is
Also like a morphic resonance too. It's got like a morphic resonance sort of twist to it.
Because the thing is, they describe it that they're actually in that place. And I think remote viewing is more kind of a psychic ESP thing, isn't it? Where they might be standing in front of a whiteboard or with paper, and they're getting impressions. And
I look at that as being just a depth thing. I mean, you just can't pretend to be as out of body as as no matter how good you get at meditating, you're never gonna be able to make yourself dead. Like, that's like the ultimate sort of you're completely I don't know that you can remove yourself from the material world any more than that, and maybe those monks are able to do it. They're able to, like, the ones that don't eat for fucking months or whatever they're doing up in those mountains in the Himalayas, maybe they're doing some crazy stuff. But I could look at that as just being a depth thing. It's like the remote viewing just can't get the picture quite as clear as it is when you're actually having that out of body experience. Because other than that, there does seem to be quite a bit of crossover. Buddy in the chat says untethered. That's not a bad word for it. When when you have that out of body, you're actually untethered. Whereas when you're doing the remote viewing, you got to really just focus on this spot and meditate on it. And the guys who are good at it seem to be able to get there. I mean, I still like that seems crazy, but we got the same thing with the remote viewing where it's verifiable, or verified at some level, I think, right, Graham?
Yeah.
Pat Price did some amazing stuff before something happened to him.
Yeah.
I talked to Russell Targ about Pat Price, and it's like one of the things they did, there were two people, and they said to Pat Price, right, these two people are going to go to a location. Tell us what about that location. And he said, I see two big pools of water, like swimming pools, and I see two tall water towers there. And he drew it out and said how big he thinks these pools were. And that's exactly where they were. They were an outdoor swimming pool, and there were two swimming pools there. And when they checked what he'd drawn out, his dimensions of the size of the swimming pools were exactly correct. But the thing was, there were no water towers where the swimming pool was. And after doing some research, they found that there were water towers there decades ago because there was a water treatment plant. So he was kind of seeing back in time as much as he was seeing what's going on right now. But I also talked to a guy called Oliver Tapp, who's got a great book out, where he went to the Monroe Institute and went through all these different weeks there of different processes for out-of-body experience. And he has some great verification stuff there with things that happened while he was out of body, and then coming back and finding those things really happened. So there's all different levels to it, isn't it? And it seems like you can get out of body if you use the technique.
Yeah, I mean, lucid dreaming is also, there's been verified lucid dreaming experiments too, and in conferences and stuff too, where people can verify certain things that are going on. So it's all like OBE, NDE, and lucid dreaming. And I feel like it's all sort of similar. There's similar verifiable events, but they're in different dimensions or different levels or something. Like Darren says, I feel like the OBE is not quite as deep as an NDE. Like an NDE, you're there living another life potentially. Whereas an OBE, you're just kind of floating around almost like in a surface dimension or something like that.
It reminds me of those dudes smoking salvia, man. Just, that's even a little different.
Oh, yeah.
But that kind of does go back to the dude that fought in the war, man. You hear some stories about some of these guys that smoke some salvia, and they go into such another deep state that they're just out on a couch with their buddies around them for 10 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. But when they come out, they've lived like years of another life. They had, maybe a family that they got attached to, and all of a sudden they're back in their shitty life doing drugs in the basement. But I mean, maybe not always like that, but the salvia thing is sort of weird. It does seem to be the closest to to that sort of spin on it, but it does seem to have, like I said, a bit of morphic resonance to it as well. It's like because the mom knowing, is that because was it Sheldrake did it all with dogs, right? Where dogs knew when
And there's other examples too. There's other examples with rats or other animals, I think, as well.
Yeah, so is there some little offshoot of you that's doing an OBE when you're not even thinking about it because it's like, I can't wait to get home, or and then the dog's like, fuck yeah. But I feel like that's all sort of playing on the same instrument, maybe just using different chords.
Yeah.
Speaking of
What's the other
speaking
I
of
was just say
chords,
go
go ahead.
go on, sorry.
No, you go.
I just I remember hearing about doing the research into dogs and watching them when the people decide they're going to come home, and that the dogs didn't react to them when they started physically heading home. The dogs reacted to them when they decided now is my time to go home, before they even got up from their desks.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what Darren was mentioning. Yeah, it's like it's a psychic thing in a way, Yeah.
Which
Speaking
makes
of
it seem like
chords,
it's all a psychic thing. Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Big,
all
in the chats there, Bigot Radio says, Bible says you have a cord attached to the spirit in the meat suit, and the NDE allows spirit to untether how all other ways have no idea on. So he's saying that, okay, the NDE is deeper because it allows the spirit to untether, whereas you're still tethered in an OBE or a lucid dream probably or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard something about the tether. Some people have said they've seen this golden rope or something.
Yeah. Silver cord. I seem to remember it as a silver cord. But yeah, maybe it's different colors.
Well, there's that movie, dude. I think there was that, wasn't that cartoon movie? I forget what it was called.
Oh, I know what you're talking
Gets
about.
hit
Yeah.
by a fucking car, and
Yeah.
everyone's like got these tethers going on, and a waking life maybe. And at the
Yeah.
end of that one, it turns out that his whole out of body or NDE experience, he died, I think, at the end of it. Spoiler alert. I think you're supposed to say spoiler alert first. Anyway, I think it was figuring out that it was like just the amount of time that, because we talked about how, I guess we didn't really talk about it, but we mentioned how the Salvi experience can make you think you lived years someplace else. And, poof, it was only 5 minutes here. People have that experience with dreams all the time. You fall back asleep and you have a crazy dream and you think you've been asleep for hours and it's been like 15 minutes. And it's now I can't remember
Where you go with that? Yeah.
Oh yeah, but at the end of the movie, the premise of it is that if all this can happen in they're saying that sometimes in the dreams, if they're doing the studies that from the REM or whatever, that your dream might actually only be like a couple of seconds, and it's played out in your head in this big long elaborate thing. So the movie was like, well, what could you, because I think there's the science is that your brain just keeps going for 8 minutes after you die. Your shit just keeps sort of firing in most instances. I mean, maybe if you got your brain's blowing out or something, that might change, but for the most part, that shit keeps firing. So he's like, if all this shit can happen in a dream in like 7 seconds, then what could happen in 8 minutes?
I haven't come across that. That thing is the 8 minutes. I talked to Dr. Abin Alexander.
Maybe I'm making it up. Check.
No, it's because there's so much research out there, isn't there, that you miss things all the time. But I talked to Eben Alexander, and he said to me, he was professor in neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School. He said to me, within 20 seconds of your heart stopping, around 20 seconds, your brain will flatline. But maybe when they say flatline, they're only measuring one thing, and there may be other things going on they're not measuring.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yes, it looks like I'm not talking shit. This one says 7 minutes, but it says maybe more. So, but I mean, so that would be the wondering thing is if that 7 minutes is probably pretty similar to what an NDE is, because it's almost probably the exact same thing where your brain is like, everything else is off. Your brain thinks you're dead, so who knows what it's doing. It's doing something crazy though. And it seems to be tangible.
Yeah. And also there's a thing where if this you get 100 people together who have a cardiac arrest and then are resuscitated, only 10% of them will say they've had a near-death experience. So if there is a thing where the brain's firing off for 7 or 8 minutes after you're dead, why is it only 10% of people who have a near-death experience? It should be all of them, shouldn't it?
Well, I
Maybe
mean,
something else is going on.
I wonder if we take literally the thought that lots of these people don't even have inner dialogues. I mean, if that stat is true, then who knows? Those might be the same people. It's like the people that don't have it, because to me, it seems crazy to think that someone doesn't have an inner dialogue going on. But I keep saying this stat around that is like, but most people don't. There's or at least a giant chunk of people that don't. I would assume that would like rule you out from having an NDE right away if you just can't even think about things. I mean, how do you think about things without an inner dialogue? Even do you just? I don't get it.
There's people who don't have imagination as well. It's called aphantasia. And there's different levels of it, but there's some people you say to them, okay, imagine a red apple. They just can't do it. They just don't bring up images in their mind.
Wow. That's fascinating. So what I want to talk about the medical system and our hospital system as well. But I had some other questions sort of staying on the vein that we were on here. Is there any overall messages of returning, like any overall trends and messages that people get when they meet others in the NDE world and they come back? Like, how sometimes it's like, you have more work to do, or you have a choice to go or stay. Like, is there any trends that you see with even with some of your own experiences? Because you also do past life or you do regressive, you do hypnotherapic.
Yeah.
What do you call it?
Past life regression.
Oh, you do past life regressions. Okay.
Yeah. Well, one of the messages one of the things I see is often people are, when they come to a barrier during their near-death experience, and it could be all sorts of symbolic. It might be a white picket fence, or it might be some kind of force field. Or one guy described it as a bubble that kind of looked like a bubblegum bubble that he was stuck on one side of this membrane. And then there are other people, and that barrier is like basically saying you can't come any further, you have to go back. And then there's other people who are given a choice to whether they want to come back or not. And even though they have small children and they don't really think, I have to go back for my children, then it's okay, I'll stay here, my kids will be all right. But then they've talked into coming back. But one of the biggest things that you see a lot of in my book as well is the life review, which can be really powerful. And that's where you would see every second from the life you've lived up to that point, and you experience all the emotions. But you also see if you've been mean to someone, you experience their emotions. So you feel how bad they felt when you were mean to them. Or you might feel how good somebody feels when you're nice to someone. And people come back from that experience with such an empathy for other people, because they've suddenly realized how they can have an impact and make people feel really bad. And they don't want to make people feel like that anymore. So that's a big kind of message of realizing how much of effect you can have on the people around you. And that's one of the reasons I think near-death experiences are so generous and friendly and giving when I encounter them. It's something I see in like doing the podcast that's about our afterlife and people who into UFOs. I find in the afterlife side, the people are a lot more generous,
spiritual and
open to do it. Yeah.
Huh. That's fascinating. What was I going to say about that? I'm gapping out today. That I know you don't get into the religious part that much, but I mean, what you were just talking about reminds me of heaven and hell and the judgment and the way, like going back to Egypt, the weighing of the heart, the versus your soul and all that. I mean, it's hard not to think that when this happened thousands of years ago, that religions weren't created from these experiences, or saints weren't, created when somebody comes back from this experience with some special power. They've had the life review. They're like, you have to be good to people. Like, it's almost like they could have made religion out of this and said, like, you have to be good to people, otherwise you're going to go to hell. And hell is that judgment of you being really nasty to people.
Yeah, because the judgment there is that you're judging yourself. No one else judges you when you're in that life review. And I've talked to a guy called Dr. E. Gregory Shushan a couple of times. Have you talked to him?
I don't
He's-
think we have, but I've listened
Yeah,
to
we
him.
have. Yeah, that's the ancient afterlife guy, I think.
Oh
right?
yeah, we did. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's awesome. Yeah.
He looked at near-death experiences in indigenous religions.
Yeah. That was awesome.
And
Yeah.
that idea that the near-death experience, people had bad ones and good ones thousands of years ago. That's what gave them the idea of heaven and hell. But this idea of God judging you when you die is more of a human construct than something
Yeah.
people come across. And
Yeah, it's like they turned that into an institution in a way, you know, that phenomena.
yeah, and some of the distressing near-death experiences can be so awful. And there's also that time thing as well, where somebody might be dead for 40 minutes and they come back and they said their near-death experience was 2 years, and they were in hell for 2 years with demons and fire and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy. What about my labs as far as your abduction work goes? Like, have you regressed anybody? Do you do those types of regressions as well? I was trying to think of the term, but do you do past life and like abduction regression and stuff like that, or?
I've done 2 or 3. It's the thing where people come to me for past life regression, and some hear me on the UFO podcast and contact me. But I've done just 2 or 3, and I feel okay doing that because I've got such knowledge of the abduction phenomenon and talked to so many people about it that I think I know how to find my way through it. And I've got
Without
so
leading
much
them on?
experience doing past life regression. I know all these techniques to move around and how to use hypnosis to search out things in the memory.
Without leading them to it.
Yeah, that's one of the big rules, almost like the prime directive, that you have to use basic questions that are not at all leading or suggestive. And I sometimes wonder if my clients finish a session and sit back thinking, man, Simon's questions were rubbish. But that's how it's got to be. And I heard, Bud Hopkins used to work
Yeah.
with a lot of abduction people. He would test them sometimes to see how suggestive they were. And when he's had them, like they were saying they were on board some craft with some ETs, he'd say, do you see the guy in the corner with the yellow shirt? There should be a guy in the corner. And if somebody said, yeah, I see the guy with the yellow shirt, he knew how suggestible they were.
Yeah. That's a good example. Any MyLab research or any MyLab theories or thoughts at all compared to the whole traditional kind of ET one, or?
Yeah, there's definitely something going on there, isn't there? I talked to a guy called Steve Neal. I don't know if you know him.
I don't think
He's
so.
really good. He's got a YouTube channel, and he's a special effects guy in Hollywood. So when he talks about his abduction experiences, he also makes CGI representations, so you can see all the aliens and him and all these things happening. But there was one when he was a kid, maybe 10 or 12, and he wakes up in a bed, and this is obviously on Earth. There's 2 greys in there, these 2 grey aliens, and there's a doctor, and he's wearing a white coat and he's got a shirt unbuttoned and the tie, and he's balding and he's got a moustache. And the ET does something to his forehead and like puts something in, like a big pin or something, some device, and then takes it out. And then the doctor leans forward and looks at the forehead and kind of says to the alien, oh, look, man, you've made a big hole. He's going to notice that in the morning when he wakes up. You can't be doing this. And that was when the memory stopped. That's all he remembers of that. So that definitely sounds like some sort of MyLab going on there.
Do you think is it increasing or decreasing? I thought in my head the phenomena it sort of peaked in the 90s or something like that, or the 80s or 90s or 2000s, but it slowed down. Do you have any thoughts to the overall phenomena,
With MyLabs, I
or just
don't know.
abductions in general?
I think there's still stuff happening, but it's changing, because originally, say back in the 70s or 80s, people didn't see greys so much, and then they became more and more prevalent, and they became almost like 90% of abductions. But then people started talking about the aliens would take men's sperm and women's eggs, and then women would talk about pregnancies that would disappear, and then people started being introduced to babies and children on craft that look like hybrids. But now it seems to have got to a point where they build the hybrids so well you couldn't tell that they're hybrids. They look completely human. And it seems to me that this hybrid thing has died out now. I might be wrong about this, but all the people I talk to and the books I read, it seems like they had some program that they wanted to develop hybrids, and now that program's completed.
Wow.
And David Jacobs thought it was very sinister and it was some kind of invasion, but I don't see that really. I think if they wanted to invade, they could do it very easily with their technology they have. There's something else going on, but then it gets into consciousness and interdimensional stuff and spiritual stuff. It gets a lot more complicated. And there was one guy on my podcast. I keep talking about people I talk about on my podcast. Yossi Ronan, this Israeli guy. He was being abducted, and one of the ETs said to him, what we look like is imprinted upon us by you. Where we come from, we don't have physical form. And that's kind of interesting to me. It might be this, as greys became more part of popular culture and people aware of that imagery, that's what they were seeing. Because the thing about the greys is, why are they humanoid just like us, with 2 arms and 2 legs and a head? And how is it they're fine in our gravity, in the air pressure on Earth? Are they not? They don't seem to be getting ill from bacteria and viruses. It's almost like they're either constructed, genetically engineered to be on Earth, or they are interdimensional beings, and we kind of construct something with our subconscious.
Yeah, because I thought of incubus and succubus as being an ancient, abduction phenomena in some ways. Like when you talked about the sperm and the eggs, I mean, that's basically what, you could argue that incubus and succubi were doing. And that kind of fits with what you just said about that. I mean, now because we're so technologically advanced, they're aliens, and at some point, who knows what they'll be. But what's the latest trend in the phenomena now? Is it past, like, now that we're past the hybridization, what is it now?
I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like abductions are happening the way they were, but it's still going on. There's still interactions. But it does tend to be older people that will come out and talk about it. And the younger people might be having the same experiences that's always happened. But when people get older, they seem to peter out. It's almost like you pass the age of reproduction and the ETs aren't interested in you anymore. Or it might be that it becomes more spiritual and they're a lot more friendly with you. And I do wonder if they allow people to remember certain things for some reason, and they block out other things, and it may be something to do with whether or not you can handle it. Because I had an experience where I've had 2 close-up UFO sightings, but I was being taken through a past life regression, and we saw the death of that past life, and then the hypnotherapist was saying to me, "Okay, now just drift away from that life. Just drift away. Just tell me the next thing that comes to you." And instantly I was terrified. It's like somebody flicked a switch from 0 to 100. And she said afterwards she could see my muscles quivering. And I found myself on this table in what you might call a classic abduction. There were these greys there, and they had some contraption, and I was naked lying on this table, and they did things to me. And then I had this vision implanted in my mind of being in this space. It was like a huge forest, but a whole part of it had been leveled. There was just tree stumps, and it was about the size of a football field. And that's where I was with all these adults. And there was this big planet in the sky, much closer than the moon has ever been. And I think far too close for reality, because gravity fields and magnetic fields would mess it up. But there was this pathway coming from that planet to where I was standing, and all these children in white were coming down the pathway. And then I had this message in my mind that said, "When the planets meet, the children will return." And then instantly I was back in the room with the ETs, and they led me over to the wall, and this hole opened up in the wall that was kind of like a cookie cutter shape of me, like I could fit perfectly in it. And the hole in the wall didn't lead to another room or a hallway. It was this amazing energetic space that was full of light and color. And I went through there, and suddenly I was shooting through that space at 100 miles an hour. And I got the impression of other people there, other humans, and we're all heading in the same direction. And the next thing, I'm in this long room that's quite thin, and there's all these white chairs that are kind of coming out of the wall. You know, they say that it's like they're part of the wall, they're not added. And there were clothes on the floor, and there were two greys in there, and I got this message that said something like, no one goes home till they got their clothes on. And then I went to the end of this room, and there was a hole in the floor, and I stepped into the hole, and the next thing I was back in my flat in London, and it was 2 a.m. So I don't know if that experience really happened. It came up under hypnosis. One of the things is we were doing past life regression. It wasn't that I went for the hypnosis to say, okay, let's look for ET experiences. So it couldn't have been something that was suggested. But I feel like I have a lot of knowledge about the abduction phenomenon. So maybe my subconscious might have made it up. But also I wonder about it. I was so scared when that started. Maybe the ETs look at me and think I'm a bit of a wuss, and it's like, we can't let this guy remember the stuff, it'll freak him out too much. But there are people who don't get freaked out by it so much, and they allow them to remember some of it.
It reminds me of that unreasonable fear that people have in paranormal encounters when they're awake. You know, sometimes even if up against a Sasquatch or some other things where they just have this like fear, like you said, fear ramps up to 1,000 right away. Interesting. So what were those your? Did you have other UFO up close UFO encounters too, or was that one of them, or did you have like waking ones?
Well, yeah, the waking ones I remember just seeing a UFO. Like there was when I was driving into London, I'd been out gigging with my band, and this was about 1993. And it was 1 a.m. on a Monday morning. I'm on this motorway called the M40 heading into London. There's no other cars around, which was a bit odd. And up ahead of me on the left was this really bright light. And, you know, we drive on the left. So this is the side of the road I was on. And I knew that that was an empty field because I use this motorway a lot. And I thought, why would there be a really bright light there? Maybe there was some emergency works for electricity mains or something. And I slowed my car right down to about 5 miles an hour. And as I got to that point, there was this craft that was about the size of a big house, shape of a rugby ball. It was completely silent, 25 feet off the ground, maybe 200 feet from me. Didn't move an inch the whole time I saw it, and had many, many pin spot red lights along one half of the bottom of it, and a really powerful beam coming out the other end of it, like a spotlight, which kind of reminded me of that, you know, like pop culture thing of people being abducted by a tractor beam and they go up into the light. And so I was so slow, and I was looking up at it through my windscreen and going forwards and leaning forwards, you know, as it was moving past. I got a really good look at it. And then when it was, so I couldn't see it, I just increased my speed and went home. And I wonder if there's a thing where if you see a UFO like that, it's because they want you to see them. And it's part of this consciousness thing, this universal, multidimensional thing where it's part of your life path.
Yeah.
And it's putting you in a certain direction. And so that's why I saw another UFO a few years later, and I've had psychic experiences and other stuff happen. And I wonder if it's all been to direct me to the point I'm at now, where I'm doing a podcast. Podcasts all about all this stuff and writing a book. Maybe my thing was I'm supposed to be a communicator.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. My sighting in that, I think of that sometimes with my sighting in 1990 too, because it was like it was a physical craft flying through the sky. Multiple people saw it, and some people just weren't fazed by it. Like years later, when we started the podcast, we contacted these two Kiwi girls, and they're like, yeah, we just chalked it up to too many beers, and like it changed my life, but they didn't seem to give a shit about it. It was really weird. But you didn't have any missing time that night with that first sighting, that egg-shaped sighting? Or?
No. And I knew enough about abduction to check the clock when I got home. There was no missing time.
Hmm.
But it does seem to be abductions where people are taken and brought back at almost the moment they were taken. So, you just don't know,
Yeah.
do you?
Yeah, exactly.
Is there any like correlation with sort of time of death or age or type of death? If it's sort of, like, do people who are in the, twilight years in the late 80s that are kind of, on the way out anyway, do they still have these sort of near death experiences, or is it sort of more people who are taken too young sort of thing? Is there anything like that, or and do those? How did you come across anything where the two realms start to merge as someone gets to super old, where they're kind of they're gonna go any sort of day? Did they start to merge those realms at all?
Yeah, there's a thing called Deathbed Visions. Have you guys looked at Deathbed Visions?
We've heard of them before. We had
Yeah.
somebody on to talk about it. I think I can't remember who it was.
Well, there's a book written in 1926 by a guy called Sir William Barrett, who was part of the Society for Psychical Research. He wrote that book in 1926, and that was titled Deathbed Visions, and that's where the phrase comes from. And it's people who are on their deathbed start seeing deceased relatives coming to visit them and seeing spiritual beings and having conversations with them. And there's a guy in America called Dr. Christopher Kerr, who's the director of a hospice, who got permission to investigate this. You had to go through ethical standards committees and things to get permission to ask patients what they're experiencing. And it's quite remarkable. And I believe a lot of hospice nurses see this going on. And it's almost like one way they can judge if somebody's close to death. So in the last few days or couple of weeks, they start having these visions. And then the closer to death they get, the more of these visions they're having. And the nurse may be in the room with them, and the person in bed's having a conversation with somebody who's not there. And they'll say, "Oh, no, it's my husband. He's come to collect me. We'll be going soon. I've got to make sure I'm packed." Or they say something like, "I'm looking out the window at the beautiful children playing out there on the grass, but they'll be on the 4th floor. There is no grass outside the window or children." And so sometimes, occasionally with these deathbed visions, they see somebody visit them who they think is still alive. And their family say, "Yeah, this person died a few days ago, but we didn't tell them because they're on their deathbed. We didn't want to cause them any stress." So how did this person on their deathbed know this other person had died and that they were coming to visit them? And so there is that, like you said, that kind of blending as people get very close to death. They start having more connection with the afterlife. They call it the veil, and the veil starts being lifted. But also, Christopher Kerr said that if they get very close to death, but then they kind of rally and they start getting better and better, that then the visions start slowing down and disappearing. And there was one guy that said to him, "Hey, I was back in 1926. I was having afternoon tea with my parents." And he said, "So this was a dream?" He goes, "No, I was there. I was actually there." How did they do that? So there's a lot of powerful stuff going on there with deathbed visions, and they can be a great little part of the puzzle for evidence of an afterlife.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Speaking of the doctors and the system a bit, I mean, I was going to ask you this too before we wrap it up. Do you think there's been an opening, because there's been so much research and a lot of good books and about NDEs? There seems to be a greater acceptance to it. And your book has a couple examples of one where, like you told us that example at the beginning of the show, where the doctor asked what had happened to the guy who was dead. But then there's also other examples in your book where the doctor won't have any of this. I mean, a person comes back and they're saying like, "Oh, I saw this and I saw you do this and that," and the doctor's like just freaking out, like that can't be
Yeah.
that's not real. Like they will not accept that that's happened. So do you think there's a change in attitude or are we stuck in this system where the medical doctors will just never accept that this is a real thing?
No, I think things are changing. I think there's a thing where there's, over the decades, it's getting better as
Yeah.
doctors retire, and there'll be the old doctors who are really stuck in their ways, and they retire, and the younger doctors that are more open-minded are coming through. But I think that the nurses get a lot more access to this stuff because they have a lot more connection to the patients and they see them so much more than the doctors. It's like you say, that guy in that incident, he was a neurosurgeon, and she said he clenched his fists and his teeth, and he said, "I'm not going to stand here and listen to this," and he stormed out the room.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think things are getting better.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks
Simon,
to people like you.
Yeah, Simon, this has been great. Is there anything you feel like we didn't get to that we left out?
Yes and no. I mean, I'd love to talk about my book, and that was great because I could talk about these incidents, which I find so interesting. But you know, these phenomena are so complicated. We could talk for hours, couldn't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where can people get the book? Where's the best place to get it? Is it through your website, or should they just go to Amazon, or is there preferred purchase sort of?
Oh, it's on Amazon worldwide, and it could also be in Barnes and Noble, places like that. I don't think they'd have it on the shelf, but you could get it from their website or go in the shop and ask them to get it in. Oh, and also it's on audiobook, and it's on Kindle, and it's on paperback. Yeah, so you can get those 3 different ones of it.
Oh, good. Awesome. And what about your website? Pastliveshypnosis.co.uk? Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. And if anybody wanted to do a past life regression with me, I do them all over Zoom, and I've clients all over the world. And you can go into my calendar and book a free 20-minute call if you want to talk to me about doing a past life regression, and we can see what you want to achieve with that.
Awesome.
And that's through the website?
Yeah, but on the website, it's the booking page.
What about social media? Anything like that?
I got Instagram, which is our paranormal afterlife with an underscore between each word. And there's a private Facebook group as well. It's people can join it, you know, but there's sometimes people in there might put personal things in there about somebody they've lost or experiences they're having. So we keep it as a private group so that, you know, people who are interested in this. I've had a couple of people join who are quite rude and, you know, saying that reincarnation's completely not real. The afterlife is a load of nonsense. And so we try to avoid people like that.
No
Any more
doubt.
books coming up?
I'm looking to write another book. I'm thinking of writing a book about these people who have coma experiences where they live on another Earth,
That'd be
and
great.
also a book about children and their past life memories.
Awesome.
The children and past life memories is always a good one. I mean, if you start doing on that, get in touch with us, because we were looking for someone to do shows on that with years ago, and it's like there's not a lot. There wasn't a lot of people to talk about that with. So
Yeah, there's Jim Matlock. He's really good.
and then
And
there was
Carol Bowman.
Carol, yeah, we tried to get in touch with her like a decade ago, but wasn't able to put it together.
Yeah, I could talk about it for hours with all sorts of stuff, because I've interviewed Carol Bowman and Jim Matlock and Jim Tucker, but I think Jim
Yeah.
Tucker's retired now, and also Erlander Haraldson, who did a lot of great research, but he's passed on now. And I got all sorts of books on it as well. I find it particularly fascinating, the thing with the birthmarks and birth deformities that relate to the past life.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Maybe
Yeah, well,
another
let
show
us
down
know.
the road. Yeah, maybe
Yeah, let
another
us
show
know.
down the road.
Yeah, we'll have you back on when that book comes out.
Yeah, definitely. I'll let you know when it's done.
Right on. Thanks, Simon. This has been great. We appreciate you sticking around, even though we were late because of the time change fiasco. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show. This was great, and we look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's been a bit different with you guys. So
Yeah, good.
yeah, I'll let you know.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks,
See ya.
Simon.
All right, bye then.
Bye. I was gonna say that's what they all say, but I didn't want to.
And that was a chat with Simon Brown, verified NDEs. What'd you think?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, honestly, I think it's good to put a book like that together with all the verification. I mean, this is like, how can you can't really argue much against that. There's the evidence is overwhelming. So yeah, that's awesome.
Absolutely. So big thanks to Simon for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. And of course, even bigger thanks if you're one of our nobles in Great America that do choose to support us. We don't force you, but we do like it if you do. It's how we make a living. It's how we feed and clothe ourselves. So grimerica.ca/support. If you can, when you can, sign up for monthly or make a one-time donation, and you will become a noble of Grimerica. And if you do that to the tune of $1,000 or more, you can be a lord or a lady, and you can even be a god if you got 10 grand. So give us a call. We're open for business. Let us know. Check out GrimericaOutloud.ca for other podcasts, adultbrain.ca for all the audiobooks, tons and tons of them, 160, I think, something like that now. Contact@thecabin.com for trips and events, and GrimericaCBD.com for CBDs, tinctures, and gummies. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.